RaceChrono Pro is an app. I think it's like 15 bucks or something like that, available for both Android and iOS. For me, I use an iOS device. I have an external GPS, which I recently updated. I'll talk more about that in a moment. I have a GoPro for video and a Kiwi for OBD2 adapter that gives me a bunch of output from the car, things like engine speed, throttle input, stuff like that. So the updates that I've noticed recently, and I'll get to them in a little bit, RaceChrono Pro now natively outputs a usable friction circle, which gives you essentially real-time plotting of accelerometer data, both lateral and longitudinal g-forces, which is very, very useful, but only if paired with a GPS unit or some other source that gives you usable accelerometer data. And I also happened to recently switch to a Racebox Mini, which gives me just that. But before going too deep into the data, I wanted to preface by saying I usually tell people, looks like the screen share stopped. I usually tell people, like my own personal approach on a given day. I try to ignore data. I try to ignore comparisons, live timing, anything like that, until I've done a run that I actually feel happy with. I think most of us, we're at a point where like you can kind of tell, was this a good run, bad run? Did I hit a cone? Was I using everything that the car could give me? Data is useful in retrospect. And looking back between your runs, where were you losing or gaining time? It can also be useful if you're stuck and you just don't know in the moment, like on my next run, what's the right thing to do? Sometimes data analysis can give you that information, but it's really hard in 10 minutes between runs to really understand objectively what you should be doing based on just data. So, a lot of people do this, not everybody does. Try to leave some time after each run to forego the socializing and spend a moment thinking about the run that you just did yourself, corner by corner, element by element, and use that time to develop a plan for the next run without even touching the data. I know I probably come across as a little bit, I don't know, too focused or something like that on a typical autocross day, especially GGR events when I'm trying to compete. But it's because I'm spending that time between runs, not socializing, but rather thinking about what I want to do with the next run. So with all of that, I will start diving into the data. So as I mentioned, this is RaceChrono Pro. I'm looking at data from our last GGR event. This is July 9th. We have the devices I mentioned that I use to collect the data, a GPS unit, an OBD2 adapter, and a device that allows me to collect video. Really all you need to do is, I'll back up a little bit. It's pretty obvious where to go from here when you want to start collecting data. You hit start. And all the app does at that point is it collects all of that data without really mapping anything. Once you assign a map to your session, which typically Drew or somebody like that will collect, we map a starting location, a finishing location, and typically some split points. Then the app has something to work with, and it can look at your GPS data, calculate when you passed each of those waypoints, and then actually start timing things for you. It can actually do that in retrospect too, so you can always change the track that you have assigned to a current session, and it'll recalculate everything for you based on the raw GPS data that it was collecting throughout. So I'll dive into an example of the kind of analysis that you can do with RaceChrono, and I'm going to keep it oriented in portrait mode just because this is more naturally how most of us end up using the app. Hopefully everybody can see. At the top, I have video. Second from the top is a map overlaid on satellite imagery. Third from the top is the friction circle that I alluded to. But I think we should actually ignore that one for now. And all the way at the bottom is a speed trace. One caveat to note when you're looking at GPS data, especially comparisons, a lot of times the GPS data itself won't be aligned exactly correctly. I think for the most part, mine is. And so if you zoom in, I'm doing a comparison now. you can see there were some variations in the lines that I took between the two sessions. One of them is a bit more opaque than the other. But overall, the lines agree. It looks like my GPS tracking was pretty consistent across the run, so I can trust the comparison. But if you look at a comparison and one of the lines is completely off the map, essentially, then you should be careful with respect to using that data for any comparison purposes, because especially the differential timer might not mean a whole lot. So let me go through a couple of examples. This is mostly stuff that I looked at in retrospect, but it relates to things that I was feeling on the day. First, I'll compare my first run of the afternoon to my fastest run of the day. And I'll zoom in a little bit on a couple of things because it's interesting. So my fastest run of the day, at the bottom, the speed trace. My fastest run of the day is the darker speed trace. My first run of the afternoon is the lighter speed trace. There's also a pink line there that reflects the time differential. And again, because on the map, the lines are overlaid, I think we can largely trust the time differential here. And the story in this comparison is relatively simple. I got a better launch at the start. I carried more speed through the starting beam, and I was flat all the way to this point. I trusted the car to carry more speed into the next element, gained a bit more time. By this point, I'm 0.2 of a second up if you look all the way at the bottom right. I carried a good deal more speed into the far side hairpin. So looking at just the speed trace, this looks pretty good, right? Like I broke later, I'm carrying more speed on the way in. Just generally, I carried more speed, and so as a result, there's like a 0.4 difference by the time we get to the end of the run in terms of the overall time. But something to note, I carried more speed into that far side hairpin, yes, but the timing differential, if we scroll through from corner entry where I was about 25 hundredths of a second ahead to corner exit, I didn't actually really gain anything. So all of that speed that I carried in just resulted, if we look at the map, in me wasting a whole bunch of time in the middle of the corner traveling a greater distance. So the net impact was really about the same between the two runs.
Eddie, this may be sorry, where the satellite, our GPS gets shifted sometimes. It appears
no, this was pure driver error. I'm going to show you another example. And by the way, anybody, you can ask questions whenever you want. I don't mind interruptions. My struggle throughout the day was figuring out how to get the car to stop for that far side hairpin. For example, my last run compared to my fastest run, if I scroll through and we look at the time differential, it's pretty spot on except for this big wiggle here. Like it's relatively close all the way through. And again, you'll think, okay, the fastest run shaded a bit darker on the speed trace relative to the current run, my last run, which is lighter. I carried more speed in. Looks good. My goal throughout the afternoon was try to figure out how to brake as light as I thought I could for that far side hairpin. But again, if I zoom in, this time I massively overshot the turnaround. You can actually also see on video, I ended up pointing to a down cone, which didn't help the situation. Maybe I should have just taken a rerun. But in any case, all of that speed that I carried in, if I could have made it stick, maybe I had something there, but the car just kind of plowed forward. I couldn't get it stopped, and I traveled a much greater distance as a result. And all the good work I did throughout the rest of the run was lost to that one mistake. It was kind of interesting throughout the day. It felt like, I'm not sure if anybody else experienced this. The entry to that hairpin was tough. You'll see on the map, there isn't really a straight braking zone, which is a challenge unto itself, of course. So you're balancing carrying as much speed as you can out of this last section and into the space before the hairpin with taking a line into the hairpin that minimizes distance. And I never quite got it right. And it felt like the car just wasn't giving me everything I wanted under braking. And I'll detail that a bit more using the friction circle later. As it turns out, one of the things Himanshu mentioned just before the meeting, it's a great point, something I wish I had thought of on the day. The middle of this braking zone, if I kind of scroll forward in time, right about here, you're cresting the kind of the crown in the road. So it's only natural. You're entering this braking zone. You're about to ask everything of the car braking in a straight line. And for my car, that's maybe 1.1 G, something like that. And it just isn't available to you because the car, the suspension is unloaded as you go over that crest. Eventually it settles down and you get it stopped. But by that point, like I was wondering if I was going to be kicked out of the event at some point for blowing by that double row of cones. I was ending up so deep. It's not ideal. So I think this illustrates a couple of things. There's use of the speed trace. More speed is better, of course, but then also making sure to pay attention to the GPS data, the location itself, which I think all the data I collected at this event with my new GPS unit appears to be pretty well overlaid and relatively accurate. So I feel like I can trust it. And it's borne out in the data, it's borne out in the timing. Increased speed on entry, but also offline on entry, far deeper in the middle of the corner, ultimately losing me looks like about 2/10, something like that.
Teddy, pardon my interruption, but let me ask you this question. Is this the default setting with RaceChrono, or you adjusted so you can see this two speed charts and the time chart?
That's a good question. So I know I've lost track of what is default, but we can go through the channels that are available. Right now, I'm just keeping it to speed. There are other things you can add, but I really feel like you want to try to simplify as much as possible. And that bottom plot, I like it for it just to be a speed trace and maybe the time differential. I don't necessarily think the differential time, the time delta is added to the plot automatically, but it is calculated. All you need to do is hit the little gear icon at the top right of the plot to configure it and add time delta to the plot. And I think it defaults to that pink color.
Time.
You might also need to change the x-axis. So if the x-axis is distance, then you're going to get a reasonable time delta. But if the x-axis is time, then there's no way to calculate a time delta. It's kind of corrects itself out that way. So x-axis set to distance and time delta enabled gives you that pink line. For sure, the speed traces should be there by default, though. Otherwise, there's nothing else to plot.
Thank you.
Teddy, the new revision allows the 4 windows?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it wasn't allowed before, but now it's the default. I was amazed when I jumped into RaceChrono after the event in my new to me Chevy SS to find like, wow, there's this new data. It's amazing. It's a shame I wasn't trying to go for speed because it seems really useful. But I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So it's really, really interesting. The thing I'll say about these speed trace comparisons and time delta comparisons, even placement comparisons, they're really only valuable if you have a good reference. And most of the time on the day, that reference is yourself. So you can only compare to as fast as you've gone yourself. It's subjective in that sense. When we get to the friction circle, that is objective. Within the constraints of the course design and things like a crest in the middle of the course, those are of course variables that you need to account for, but the friction circle can be truly objective. But again, I'm kind of giving that away. I'll get to that in just a moment. There are a couple more just basic examples I want to run through. This was my 9th run of the day, second to last. It was also okay. But here my time delta throughout was like pretty good, just fine. In fact, up until the very end of the course, I was on to maybe repeat my best cone run, which would have been nice. But then you'll see this huge spike. It's a relatively innocent mistake, but it's important. For those of us who were there, oh my God, it's even on the satellite imagery. Look at that black box in the satellite
Mm.
imagery. For
It
those of
was
us who were there
slippery.
on the day, yeah, that was hard to navigate. And I pretty much told myself, you know what? I'm just going to drive my line. If it throws me offline and compromises the exit, I'll deal with it when I get there. And in retrospect, I feel like that was a mistake. I should have considered the impact that little box was having on my performance. And this is exactly why. It's another like basic thing that I think I was missing on the day. I had a similar entry to this last section, and even the mistake that I'm about to show you, it's really hard to pick up in the GPS data, the spacing, but I know I felt it. I carried just a little bit more speed. So the lighter line, a little bit more speed into that slippery bit. That resulted in me understeering just that little bit more. It felt like either you went through that section and you were fine, or you slid a lot. And this time I slid a relatively large amount. And you'll see I then have to continue to brake, speed decreasing, trying to get the car back into line. But I still end up just a little bit wider on that brighter run. If you look at the satellite imagery, just a little bit deeper, a little bit offline, and even offline and slow, because I had to overslow to get myself back in line. My goal here was recovery. I know I don't want to sacrifice the finish. The finish was pretty fast. It's basically a straight, need to line that up. So I did everything I could to get the car back in line to do that. But in doing so, I lost due to lower speed here. And even into the next section, because now I'm compromised and a little bit further to the right, I had to slow down just that little bit more to line up that sort of identical run through the finish. And this takes, again, what was otherwise a pretty good run, and it's another 0.2 lost relative to what it could have been just from that little mistake in terms of spacing.
So just, I know this isn't RaceChrono related, but like, what should you have done?
So let me take a quick diversion. I maintain a set of notes. This is a living document for myself. It's probably a half an hour to an hour after every autocross event. What did I do well? What didn't I do well? It's aided by comparisons in data to people like Drew and others that I'm competing with, because that gives you, again, that sort of not quite objective, but still a larger sample size to measure yourself against. The things that I felt like I could have done better on the day have mostly to do with the mindset at the start of the day, and that was to be on the pace sooner, to give myself time to think about, like, hey, wait a minute, I'm sliding over that patch, I'm understeering a bit wide there, and it's compromising my run to the exit. I should take a closer look at that. Or even the run into the hairpin, I should take a closer look at that too. Salinas being a relatively small autocross site, you really only have a few elements in which you can make a difference. And if you're screwing up 2 of them and there are only like 5 elements on the course, it's really hard to recover. I spent the entire time thinking about all the stuff I was doing well and not nearly enough time thinking about those basic things that I just thought, well, it's tough, I'm doing the best I can. But maybe there's something more in it. So I think, like, specifically, I wish I tended to treat this section as almost like a straight. You can see I compromise speed a little bit on entry, and then I'm hard on the throttle through the middle. I wish I had compromised more right there, almost like I had done on my best run. But I happen to know, just by that comparison I mentioned, even compared to my best run, Drew was about 2/10 of a second faster than I was through this section. So even better than I thought was possible if ideal spacing was maintained. So I think it's basically compromising this bit, going a little bit slower, making sure to keep the car a little bit tucked further to the left here, while still maintaining speed, still cornering at the limit. That would have resulted in this bit being a wider radius, more speed carried onto that finishing straight, and overall a better time. That might be the best way of looking at it. It's like the pinch point here is not this, it's this. How do I make the pinch point as easy as possible? Well, I need to compromise back here to do that.
Hey, Teddy.
Hmm?
Question. I'm looking at RaceChrono Pro here, and you were setting the picking you wanted speed and delta. Where is that in the app? Or we're going to come to that later? I don't see it. On the
Sure. Let me, what I'll do, I'll get through the bit about the friction circle because I want to have that as just like a continuous, it extends well from the previous conversation, but then I'll back out and dive into like how to access previous data, do comparisons, things like that.
Okay.
So let me make sure I have the right one. That brings me to the friction circle. The friction circle is awesome. It is objective. It is truth. There are variants. There are, let's say, you need to take into account the variables on the day to really make use of it. But to start with, if you know that your car is capable of 1.1 G steady state cornering, it is then also capable of 1.1 G steady state braking. From a grip perspective, it's capable of 1.1 G steady state acceleration, but most of our cars can't do that. So I get maybe 0.7, 0.8 G on a hard launch from my Cayman GTS. It's relatively easy. I think we all pretty quickly get to a point where you're maximizing the car under braking alone. And that's if, unfortunately, I don't have a way to highlight it, but if you look at this plot, the very top of it, which isn't really well highlighted right now. If I scroll forward, right about here, the very top, that's straight line braking. You'll notice I never actually achieved the 1.1 G I think my car is capable of on this course for the reason that I mentioned earlier. And it's laid bare by the accelerometer data. I achieve 1.1 G or so steady state cornering, but never quite reach that in terms of braking. It's relatively easy to, especially with modern cars and ABS, to maximize a car under braking. It's also relatively easy to maximize a car under cornering. I think we're all pretty much at that point. Where the magic lies is in maximizing the grip available to you at all times. So for a novice driver, a friction circle might look sort of like a triangle. You have no problem maximizing the car under braking at the top, no problem maximizing the car under cornering at the sides, but it's that overlap region where you're overlapping braking and cornering or acceleration and cornering. Those are some of the difference makers. And in fact, not only if you blend your braking and steering or your acceleration and steering well, that enables you to utilize more of the available grip of the car. It also allows you to change the balance of the car. So for example, I did a couple of runs in 911s, non-GT3s recently, and those tend to understeer at the limit, which means that the overall grip provided by the car is ultimately limited by the front tires. The rears aren't actually giving you everything that they possibly can. Just a little bit of braking will, load transfer will tend, okay, let me take a step back. When you brake, you transfer load to the front of the car. That load increases grip on the front tires. It actually decreases more the grip on the rear tires. But if you're trying to find that ideal understeer and oversteer, that real neutral balance, sometimes that little bit of a brake actually will increase your ultimate limit of grip to, let's say, 1.15 G or something like that. It's also a good way to rotate the car. So the way in which you use the pedals, actually, it doesn't just enable you to reach the limit of the car, it also enables you to increase the limit in some cases if you use, especially the brake pedal strategically. For myself, I tend to almost never brake hard on an autocross course. I'm always trying to brake to my advantage to make the car more pointy. With my Cayman, if I brake the right way into a corner, it feels like it's about to slide, it's about to drift, but it doesn't quite get there, and I get to use that rotation to get back to throttle early, and it's just magical. what that looks like in terms of the friction plot is it's these areas up here that blending. In this case, I'm coming from a high-speed section into this tough braking zone that I was talking about. I'm blending braking and steering as I go over the crest. I would have liked to use more brake in a straight line right here, but maybe that wasn't available to me because of the crest in the road. When the car lands, I'm right back to max grip, but I'm also steering back to the right. And then I'm trying to hold it out there as long as I possibly can, gradually transitioning to throttle. And then you'll see that the plot just kind of sticks there for a while I'm cornering as much as I possibly can while giving the car full throttle. I mentioned the friction circle is objective. I think it is in the sense that the limits of your car are the limits of your car. So if we're out at Crow's Landing, for example, the surface is pretty consistent. Probably a lot of our cars can pull even 1.2 G there. In most corners, that's going to be achievable, not just in straight line braking, but also in terms of cornering and everything in between. So you want to see a friction circle that is as much of a full circle as possible. Anything, if you kind of see as you transition from hard braking to turning and then back to throttle, that the overall load in the car tends to lessen below that 1.1, 1.2 G. You should take a look at that and think about it as an opportunity. That's an opportunity either to have been using more steering in that moment or more braking or throttle in that moment. You simply weren't getting everything out of the car right then that you could have.
You left
And you
foot
take this
brake?
all the way.
You left
I
foot-
don't.
No? Okay.
I do a lot of sim racing, and so I should, but I'm lazy, and I'm pretty good with my right foot. At least in the case of autocross, anyway. I tend to try to, like, you're braking in a straight line, you trail off the brake, now you're in the middle of the corner steering. It's one transition from brake to throttle, and ideally not more than one. So I'm not doing a whole lot of like back and forth. Helps that our cars aren't turbocharged, so you don't need to keep the turbo booster or anything like that. I think the sense I get, my 2 cents, left foot braking, it's going to be a little bit faster, but only if you have the same feel with your left foot as you do with your right, and that takes time to build up. I think, like for me with the club racing I really thought about working on my left foot braking, because there I need to react to things too. It's like traffic in front of me, other things going on. I can't always guarantee that it's one transition from throttle, from brake to throttle each time. But for autocross, it feels like, I don't know, maybe a bit too complicated if you're not already maximizing the friction circle. That's my 2 cents anyway. I was driving the Cayman just yesterday, and I tried situating myself for left foot braking, and you kind of have to pivot yourself in the car, and it's not totally comfortable. So I don't know. It feels like a compromise. Like maybe ultimately faster, but at what cost? And what's also nice about the friction circle, if you put a professional driver in your car, maybe a professional driver in my car could have maximized the car under braking a bit better on this course. The friction circle will show you exactly why the pro is faster than you. There's nothing magical about it. There's no like magical skill involved here. It's precise refinement of this very technique, that blending of inputs, and the friction circle gives you an objective measure of that. And the amazing thing about this, so this, as I mentioned at the start, RaceChrono Pro recently had an update where they include the friction circle as an output. I also coincidentally changed my GPS unit. I previously had been using a VBox Sport. Let me show you what the friction circle looks like from a VBox Sport. It's not usable. I believe this is accelerometer data derived from the GPS. So it's basically saying like you're changing direction at this rate, therefore you as a moving body must be experiencing this level of force. But it's not detailed, and I don't think this is anywhere near a measure of reality. So when I upgraded to the Racebox Mini that I used for the first time this past weekend, and RaceChrono happened to update their app, and I saw this, I was amazed. Like, this is actually useful. And it's amazing to me that the device gives this to you without it. I think it calibrates once when you start moving to understand what direction forward is. And then the data throughout the day was super consistent. It was really impressive, and it's not even rigidly mounted. It's just, it has like a little sticky pad at the top of my dash. Plus, I left it on throughout the entire day and lost maybe 10% of its battery capacity, whereas my VBox Sport was dying after a single session.
It is better. I went to it last year. It is better. It's cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. I don't work for the company, but I'm amazed. I would sell them if I could, because this is really cool.
And it runs at 25 hertz, right? As opposed to your traditional 10
It does.
20 hertz.
I feel like the person on a given day, the person who best maximizes the friction circle throughout a session, and that means utilizing all of the available grip the car has on offer, making these transitions across the friction circle as quick as possible. By the way, that's where things like a stiffer suspension, stiffer sway bars and things come into play. Allows you to sweep back and forth more quickly, as opposed to a stock suspension setup where maybe you need to wait for it to settle. Spend as little time in the middle as possible, as much time truly at the limit, under braking, under cornering, and everything in between, and drive the shortest distance. And I feel like the person who does that will be fastest. It's almost certain. And what's nice, again, just to say it, I think this is the third time I'll say it. You don't need a comparison to another person to look at the friction data. You need your own thoughts on the day. Maybe you're going over a crest somewhere. Maybe there's a patch of black asphalt somewhere that has lower grip, so you know to expect less of the car in those places. It's similar on tracks. Like there are corners on tracks, especially some of the hilly ones we have around here, where you know you're not going to be able to maximize the car as if you had a compression or something like that to even boost grip. So those things notwithstanding, the friction circle gives you objective reality, and it's a good way to identify proactively, even if you felt like you were fast. If you're kind of going through this section and maybe you initiate braking and you're not quite at the edge of the friction circle, that's an opportunity. It's a measurable opportunity.